July 31st, 1944. Western approaches, 40 miles west of the Scilly Isles. Captain Lieutenant Hans Fiedler stood in the conning tower of U-333, scanning empty horizons through salt-crusted binoculars. His boat had been at sea for 8 days, departing La Pallice on July 23rd for what he knew would be a desperate mission into waters now dominated by Allied air and surface forces. This was Fiedler's first patrol as commander, having assumed control just 11 days earlier when the legendary Peter Erich Kramer left to commission one of Germany's new Type 21 Electroboats. The irony was not lost on the 45 men aboard. They sailed in an obsolete Type 7C boat, hunting enemies who possessed technology that made submarines visible beneath waves that should have hidden them. At precisely 1400 hours, the Type 147 sonar aboard HMS Loch Killen, a newly commissioned frigate of the 2nd Escort Group, painted a perfect acoustic picture of U-333 running submerged at 150 metres. The British operator, a 23-year-old from Cornwall who had trained for 8 months on the latest detection equipment, studied his cathode ray display with professional detachment. The contact was solid. Range, bearing, depth, all precisely calculated by equipment that had entered service just months earlier. What happened next, in the span of 90 seconds, would mark the beginning of the end for an entire class of German submarines. The frigate's captain, Lieutenant Commander S. Darling, gave the order that would unleash a weapon system German naval intelligence had heard rumours about but never fully understood. 3 massive mortar barrels, each 12 inches in diameter, elevated to their firing position. A mechanical calculator, fed continuous data from the sonar set, computed the submarine's exact position and set clockwork fuses automatically. At 275 yards range, the mortars fired in perfect sequence. The 3 projectiles, each weighing 390 pounds with a 207-pound Minel warhead, arced through salt air and plunged into the Atlantic. They formed a triangular pattern 40 yards on each side, bracketing U-333's position with geometric precision. The fuses, set to detonate 25 feet above the submarine's hull, triggered simultaneously. The pressure wave that followed did not need to strike the boat directly. Physics and engineering had conspired to create something far more devastating than a conventional depth charge. The 3 explosions generated converging shock fronts that met at a mathematical point occupied by U-333's pressure hull. The steel cylinder, designed to withstand external pressure at depth, had no defense against the crushing force of synchronized detonations calculated to exploit every weakness in its structure. In the boat's control room, Captain Lieutenant Fiedler had perhaps 2 seconds to understand what was happening. The pressure hull ruptured amidships. Seawater, under tremendous pressure at 150 meters depth, exploded into every compartment simultaneously. There was no time for emergency procedures, no possibility of reaching escape equipment, no chance to send a final radio message. 45 men died in less than 10 seconds. The pressure wave crushed lungs and ruptured organs before drowning could claim them. U-333, which had survived 12 combat patrols spanning 3 years, which had sunk 7 merchant ships and damaged a corvette, which had escaped the legendary Captain Walker's relentless pursuit just months earlier, ceased to exist as a functional submarine. The hull, broken into 3 major sections, began its final descent to the seabed 4,000 meters below. Aboard HMS Loch Killen, confirmation of the kill came not from explosions, but from silence. The sonar contact simply vanished. No evasive maneuvers, no attempts to dive deeper, no, a release of decoy bubbles. The submarine had been there, and now it was not. Lieutenant Commander Darling ordered the sloop HMS Starling, which had been coordinating the hunt, to search for debris and survivors. They found oil slicks, wooden fragments, and personal effects rising to the surface. No survivors. What neither the British crew nor their dead enemies yet fully understood was that this single engagement had demonstrated the effectiveness of a weapon that would rewrite the mathematics of anti-submarine warfare. The device they called Squid, rushed into service just 14 months earlier, while still technically in prototype phase, had achieved in one attack what conventional depth charges required dozens of attempts to accomplish. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The weapon that killed U-333 represented the culmination of 3 years of desperate innovation by British scientists and engineers who understood that the Battle of the Atlantic would be won or lost, not through courage or numbers alone, but through technological superiority in the electromagnetic and acoustic domains. By mid-1944, when HMS Loch Killin scored her first kill, the Royal Navy had already deployed 70 frigates and corvettes equipped with Squid systems. Yet German submarine commanders, even those with years of combat experience, remained largely ignorant of what this new weapon could achieve. The journey to that moment off the Scilly Isles began not with weapons development, but with a crisis in anti-submarine doctrine. Throughout 1942 and into early 1943, Allied escort vessels had hunted U-boats using depth charges, cylindrical canisters filled with explosives that detonated at preset depths. The system had fundamental weaknesses that German commanders learned to exploit. An escort attacking with conventional depth charges had to pass directly over a submerged submarine, dropping the charges from stern racks and side throwers. This required the attacking ship to lose sonar contact at the critical moment before weapons release, as the dead zone beneath the ship's hull extended at least 200 yards in all directions. In that blind interval, typically lasting 30 to 60 seconds, a skilled U-boat commander could alter course and depth, often escaping the pattern of explosions that followed. Even when depth charges detonated close to their target, the cushion of water between explosion and submarine absorbed much of the shockwave. To achieve a kill, charges needed to explode within about 20 feet of the target, a difficult proposition when the attacking ship had lost contact and the submarine was maneuvering evasively. The statistics told a grim story. Out of 5,174 depth charge attacks mounted by British forces during the entire war, only 85.5 would be credited with submarine kills, a ratio of 60.5 attacks for every success. German submarine crews, while terrified of depth charge attacks, understood that survival was probable if they maintained disciplined, evasive procedures. The first attempt to solve this problem had been Hedgehog, a forward-throwing spigot mortar that fired 24 small projectiles in a circular pattern ahead of the attacking ship. Introduced in 1942, Hedgehog allowed escorts to maintain sonar contact throughout the attack, a revolutionary advantage. The small charges, each weighing 65 pounds with a 35-pound explosive head, used contact fuses that detonated only on striking a submarine's hull. This eliminated the acoustic interference and water turbulence caused by depth charge explosions, allowing escorts to immediately assess results and mount follow-up attacks if necessary. Hedgehog achieved a much improved ratio of 5.7 attacks per kill, based on 268 attacks yielding 47 confirmed sinkings. But Hedgehog had limitations that frustrated escort commanders. The small warheads, while adequate to hole a pressure hull on direct contact, lacked the power to crush submarines through near-miss shock effects. A submarine could survive dozens of Hedgehog attacks if the small charges failed to score direct hits, and the circular pattern, while covering a wide area, left gaps where submarines could escape damage. Most critically, Hedgehog projectiles followed ballistic trajectories that could not be adjusted during flight. The weapon aimed at where the submarine was when projectiles were fired, not where it would be when they arrived. In late 1942, as U-boat losses mounted but remained sustainable from Germany's perspective, a small team within the Admiralty's Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development began designing Hedgehog's successor. This organization, nicknamed the Wheezers and Dodgers by naval personnel for its collection of unconventional engineering minds, had already produced Hedgehog and numerous other improvised weapons. Their mandate was simple: create systems that could be designed, tested, and deployed in months rather than years, sacrificing elegance for effectiveness. The team that conceived Squid understood that incremental improvements to existing systems would not suffice. Allied shipping losses, while declining from their 1942 peak, remained dangerously high. U-boat production continued at approximately 20 boats per month, replacing losses and slowly expanding the operational force. If the technological balance did not shift dramatically in favor of the escorts, the Battle of the Atlantic might continue indefinitely, bleeding both sides, while preventing the massive buildup of forces needed for the eventual liberation of Europe. The design specification for what became Squid demanded capabilities that seemed contradictory. The weapon needed to throw charges heavy enough to kill submarines through shock effect rather than requiring direct hits. It needed to attack while the escort maintained continuous sonar contact, allowing targeting corrections until the moment of weapons release. It needed to compensate automatically for submarine depth and movement, placing charges precisely where sonar data indicated the target would be at detonation. And it needed to be simple enough for rapid production and reliable enough to function in the harsh environment of North Atlantic combat. The solution combined existing technologies in a novel arrangement. 3 large mortars, each 12 inches in diameter, would fire full-sized depth charges, not the small projectiles used by Hedgehog. The 3-tube configuration allowed triangular patterns that could bracket a submarine, regardless of its evasive maneuvers within the pattern area. Unlike Hedgehog's contact fuses, Squid charges would use clockwork time fuses set automatically by a mechanical computer linked directly to the ship's sonar system. This arrangement meant charges could be set to explode at precise depths continuously updated until the moment of firing, and the 3 charges would detonate simultaneously at slightly different depths, creating converging pressure waves designed to crush submarine hulls. The engineering challenges were formidable. The mortars needed to be robust enough to handle 390-pound projectiles, fired at angles and elevations that varied with each attack. The mechanical computer linking sonar data to fuse settings needed to be accurate, fast, and reliable, despite constant ship motion in heavy seas. The entire system needed to be operated by ordinary seamen with minimal specialized training, as the expanding escort fleet could not rely on small numbers of expert technicians. Development proceeded at emergency pace throughout late 1942 and into early 1943. Normal testing protocols were abbreviated or eliminated entirely. The weapon went from drawing board to sea trials in less than 6 months, a development timeline that would have been impossible in peacetime. In May 1943, HMS Ambuscade, a destroyer serving as test platform, received the first operational Squid installation. The system was still technically in prototype phase, subject to modifications as operational experience revealed weaknesses. But the Admiralty, watching U-boat depredations reach their climax during the spring convoy battles, decided that an imperfect weapon deployed immediately was preferable to a perfected weapon arriving too late to matter. Production models began rolling off British assembly lines in summer 1943. Installation aboard escorts proceeded as quickly as ships could be brought into port for the necessary modifications. By autumn 1943, approximately 20 escorts carried Squid systems. By spring 1944, that number had grown to nearly 50, and by summer 1944, when HMS Loch Killen departed on the patrol that would encounter U-333, 70 Royal Navy escorts carried the weapon that would achieve a kill ratio nearly 20 times better than conventional depth charges. The men who served aboard these escorts understood they possessed a technological advantage, but most could not articulate exactly why Squid worked so much better than the weapons it replaced. The British Admiralty, paranoid about security after the Rotterdam Cavity magnetron incident in early 1943, had imposed strict information controls. Escort crews knew how to operate Squid, but not the physics and mathematics that made it lethal. German naval intelligence, monitoring Allied radio traffic and interrogating prisoners from captured escorts, knew the Allies had deployed some kind of new forward-throwing weapon, but they lacked details about its capabilities, or deployment numbers. U-boat commanders received vague warnings that enemy escorts might possess improved anti-submarine weapons, but no specific tactical guidance emerged because German analysts did not fully understand what they faced. This intelligence failure would prove catastrophic. Throughout late 1943 and into 1944, U-boats continued operating using tactics developed against conventional depth charges and hedgehog. They dove deep when detected, relying on the ocean's acoustic properties to confuse sonar operators. They executed evasive maneuvers at the moment of attack, hoping to move out of the predicted impact area before depth charges detonated. They released chemical decoys that created false sonar returns, attempting to draw attacks away from their actual position. Against Squid-equipped escorts, none of these measures provided reliable protection. The weapon's automatic depth-setting capability meant submarines could not hide by diving deeper. The continuous sonar contact maintained throughout the attack meant evasive maneuvers were tracked and compensated for. The triangular pattern, 40 yards on each side, was large enough that submarines could not escape it in the few seconds between weapons firing and detonation, and the synchronized detonations at multiple depths created pressure wave convergence patterns that German engineers had not anticipated or designed hull structures to resist. U-boat commanders who survived encounters with Squid-equipped escorts returned to port with harrowing accounts of attacks that seemed impossible, according to their understanding of anti-submarine warfare. Depth charges that appeared to know exactly where they were, regardless of evasive action. Explosions that crushed hulls from pressure alone, without scoring direct hits. Attacks that came in rapid succession, each more precisely targeted than the last, as if the enemy above could see through the water itself. These reports filtered through the BDIenst, Germany's naval intelligence organization, to the U-boat command headquarters, and eventually to engineering specialists tasked with developing countermeasures. But by the time German analysts began to understand what they faced, in late summer and autumn 1944, the technological gap had become unbridgeable within the war's remaining time frame. The weapon that sank U-333 on July 31, 1944, represented not just a tactical advantage, but a fundamental shift in the technological balance of underwater warfare. The mathematics were unforgiving. Squid achieved kills in approximately 1 out of every 3 attacks, a success ratio that would have seemed impossible to naval planners in 1942. This represented not incremental improvement but revolutionary effectiveness. To understand why this mattered, consider the operational reality facing both sides in summer 1944. Germany still commissioned new U-boats at a rate sufficient to replace losses and maintain operational strength. Training schools still produced commanders and crews, though quality had declined as experienced veterans died faster than they could pass knowledge to replacements. The submarine force, while battered, remained a strategic threat that tied down enormous Allied resources in convoy escort duties. But the introduction of Squid-equipped escorts changed the fundamental equation. An escort group that previously required multiple depth charge attacks spanning hours to achieve questionable results could now prosecute contacts to conclusion in minutes. The psychological impact on U-boat crews who survived these encounters was profound and immediate. Korvettenkapitän Peter Erich Kremer, who had commanded U-333 through 11 successful patrols before departing to commission U-2513, later described in his memoir the increasing fatalism that infected crews during 1944. The entries in his private journal, recovered after the war, documented the transformation. In early 1944, his crew still believed skill and experience provided reasonable survival odds. By June 1944, after watching convoy battles that destroyed multiple boats from his wolf pack while achieving minimal sinkings, Kremer wrote of men who went to sea knowing they would not return. The patrol on which U-333 departed July 23, 1944, under Hans Fiedler's command, had been cursed from the beginning. Intelligence reports indicated Allied air coverage of the Bay of Biscay had intensified following the Normandy landings. Escorts equipped with advanced radar and sonar systems patrolled every likely U-boat transit route. The boat's crew, reduced to 45 men from the normal complement of 50 due to personnel shortages, included 17 sailors on their first operational patrol. They had trained in the Baltic on boats that still possessed some defensive Advantage. They deployed into an Atlantic where every advantage had shifted to the enemy. U-333's final moments, those 90 seconds between detection and destruction, were repeated dozens of times throughout summer and autumn 1944 as Squid-equipped escorts deployed across the Atlantic and into the English Channel. Each sinking followed a similar pattern that became almost mechanical in its precision. Sonar contact established at ranges of 2,000 to 3,000 yards. Target tracked continuously as the escort closed, sonar operators feeding data to the Squid control system. Mortars elevated and trained, mechanical computers calculating depth, range, and trajectory. Weapons fired while the submarine remained clearly visible on sonar displays. 3 charges creating their triangular pattern, converging pressure waves, and then silence where a submarine had been. The second confirmed Squid kill came on August 6, 1944, just 6 days after. U-333's destruction. HMS Loch Killin again, hunting in the Bay of Biscay west of St. Nazaire, detected U-736 running submerged in an attempt to reach the relative safety of open ocean. U-736, a Type 7C boat commissioned in March 1943, had completed 4 previous patrols with moderate success, sinking 3 merchant ships. Her commander, Oberleutnant Zur C. Reinhard Reisch, was 26 years old, with 18 months of combat experience. He understood the dangers of Bay of Biscay transit and had carefully planned his route to avoid known patrol areas. It made no difference. The Type 147 sonar aboard Loch Killin detected U-736 at extreme range in conditions where older sonar sets would have struggled to maintain contact. The frigate closed methodically, Reisch attempting evasive maneuvers that the sonar operator tracked effortlessly. At 1400 hours, Loch Killin's Squid mortars spoke again. The pattern bracketed U-736 at 210 meters depth. 47 men died in the pressure wave convergence. 19 survivors, blown clear when the hull ruptured, reached the surface and were rescued by British escorts. Their interrogations, conducted at the Royal Navy's prisoner of war facility, provided Allied intelligence with the first direct accounts from U-boat crew members who had experienced Squid attacks. The prisoners described explosions of unprecedented precision and power. They spoke of attacks that seemed to predict evasive maneuvers, of depth charges that found them regardless of how deep they dove. They confirmed what British analysts had suspected, that German submarine doctrine had not adapted to counter the new weapon because crews did not understand what made it so effective. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. August 11th, 1944 brought the 3rd Squid kill when HMS Loch Killin, in what was becoming a deadly pattern, detected U-385 operating southwest of Land's End. U-385, another Type 7C, had departed Bergen, Norway, on July 27th with orders to attack convoy traffic in the western approaches. The boat carried a crew of 43, slightly under strength due to the same personnel shortages afflicting the entire U-boat force. Her commander, Kapitänleutnant Hans-Guido Valentina, age 31, was an experienced officer who had previously commanded U-163 before that boat was sunk in March 1943. Valentina had survived that sinking and returned to command, one of the few U-boat officers to receive a second chance after losing a boat. The hunt for U-385 demonstrated the coordination between air and surface forces that had become standard Allied procedure by mid-1944. A Sunderland flying boat from No. 641 Squadron RAF, patrolling the western approaches on routine anti-submarine sweep, detected a radar contact at dawn on August 11th. The aircraft attacked with depth charges, forcing the submarine deep but not achieving a kill. The Sunderland maintained contact and radioed for surface support. HMS Loch Killin, operating nearby as part of the 17th Escort Group, raced to the area and established sonar contact within 40 minutes. What followed was a 7-hour hunt that showcased both the persistence of escort tactics and the futility of U-boat evasion attempts. Valentina took U-385 to maximum depth, 300 meters, well beyond the boat's designed crush depth of 220 meters. The hull groaned and popped under pressure. Leaks appeared in pipe joints. Men stood rigid at their stations, knowing the slightest noise might give away their position. But the Type 147 sonar held contact even at extreme depth and range. British escorts had learned to track submarines in 3 dimensions, maintaining acoustic contact through temperature, layers and depth changes that would have broken older sonar locks. At intervals, Loch Killin would close and fire squid patterns, forcing the submarine to maneuver and consume precious battery power. Each attack came closer. Each pattern demonstrated the impossibility of escape. By early afternoon, U-385's batteries were nearly exhausted. Air quality had deteriorated to dangerous levels. Carbon dioxide buildup caused men to gasp and struggle for each breath. Valentina faced the choice every U-boat commander dreaded: surface and fight, almost certainly dying under the escort's guns, or remain submerged until the boat became a coffin. He chose to surface. U-385 broached at 1500 hours, her conning tower breaking the surface as compressed air drove her ballast tanks. The crew began pouring out of hatches, desperate for fresh air and hoping to man deck guns before British fire destroyed them. They never had the chance. Loch Killin, maintaining perfect fire discipline, waited until the submarine was fully surfaced and her crew exposed before opening fire with her 4-inch main gun and 20mm anti-aircraft weapons. The first salvos tore through the conning tower and raked the deck. Men fell wounded or dead before they could reach their battle stations. Valentina, standing in the bridge attempting to direct defensive fire, was killed in the initial barrage. Within 5 minutes, the submarine's deck gun had been destroyed, her hull holed in multiple places, and her crew forced to abandon ship. 42 men went into the water. 1 had died during the depth charge attacks. British escorts recovered all 42 survivors, who became prisoners of war. U-385 sank by the stern 30 minutes after surfacing, taking with her the last hope of her crew that skill or courage could overcome Allied technological superiority. These 3 kills in August 1944 established a pattern that would repeat with mechanical regularity through autumn and into 1945. Squid-equipped escorts, operating individually or in hunter-killer groups, achieved kill ratios that made U-boat operations in their patrol areas essentially suicidal. The weapon's effectiveness derived from the integration of 3 mature technologies: advanced sonar that could track targets in 3 dimensions, mechanical computing that could translate sonar data into precise firing solutions, and head-throwing mortars powerful enough to kill through shock effect rather than requiring direct hits. German countermeasures, developed in response to earlier Allied anti-submarine weapons, proved useless against this combination. Bold acoustic decoys, which created false sonar returns by releasing clouds of metallic strips and chemicals, could fool sonar operators for only seconds before the genuine submarine contact became obvious. Pillenwerfer bubble decoys, which generated temporary acoustic interference, created distortions that experienced operators learned to distinguish from actual submarine echoes. Diving to extreme depths, which had previously allowed submarines to hide beneath temperature layers where sonar beams bent away from targets, no longer provided safety, because Type 147 sonar could track contacts through thermoclines that defeated earlier systems. Evasive maneuvers at high speed, which consumed battery power but sometimes allowed submarines to break sonar lock, were countered by the continuous tracking capability that updated firing solutions until the moment weapons were released. The final squid pattern would arrive at the submarine's actual position, not where it had been when initially detected. German naval engineers, examining reports from surviving crews and intelligence gathered from various sources, attempted to develop tactical recommendations that might improve survival rates. The resulting directives, distributed to U-boat flotillas in late 1944, acknowledged the severity of the threat while offering few practical solutions. Boats were advised to remain submerged as much as possible, minimizing time spent on the surface even for battery charging and ventilation. This guidance ignored the reality that submerged boats running on electric motors could be detected as easily as surfaced boats, and that prolonged submersion without snorkeling exhausted batteries and air supplies. Commanders were instructed to execute immediate crash dives to maximum depth at first indication of enemy detection, theoretically placing the boat beyond the effective range of some Allied weapons. But Squid could engage targets at depths up to 900 feet, far deeper than any Type 7 or Type 9 U-boat could safely operate. The technical specifications of the weapon system itself, while partially known to German intelligence through prisoner interrogations and signals intercepts, did not translate into effective countermeasures. Knowing that Allied escorts could fire 390-pound charges to ranges of 275 yards, while maintaining sonar contact provided no obvious defensive response. The physics and geometry were unforgiving. A submarine detected within sonar range, which for advanced Allied systems extended to several thousand yards, could not escape before an escort closed to weapons range. Once within Squid range, the submarine could not evade the triangular pattern fast enough to avoid the convergent pressure waves. The weapon's automated fire control meant human reaction time no longer limited accuracy. The mechanical computers linking sonar to mortars operated faster and more precisely than any manual gun crew. September and October 1944 saw Squid kills accelerate as more escorts received the system and crew proficiency improved. HMS Lockmore scored her first kill on September 1st, sinking U-247 inches the English Channel. HMS Portchester Castle destroyed U-484 on September 9th in the western approaches. HMS Mermaid sank U-1006 on October 16th in the North Sea. Each sinking followed the pattern established with U-333, detection, tracking, precise attack, and sudden silence where a submarine had been. The cumulative toll began appearing in German naval records that documented not just losses but patterns of loss. Between July and December 1944, 54 U-boats were destroyed by British escorts in circumstances suggesting advanced anti-submarine weapons. Not all these sinkings involved Squid. Conventional depth charges and Hedgehog still accounted for many kills, but the proportion attributable to the newer weapon climbed steadily as deployment expanded. More significant than raw numbers was the kill-to-attack ratio that emerged from Allied operational analyses. A post-war study conducted by the Royal Navy's Anti-Submarine Warfare Division examined all documented Squid attacks during the final 18 months of the war. Of 50 attacks where results could be confirmed, 17 produced submarine kills, a ratio of 2.9 attacks per kill. This represented effectiveness 9 times greater than conventional depth charges, measured by post-war trials, and twice as effective as Hedgehog in operational service. The statistical gap became even more striking when analyzing what naval analysts termed time to kill, the period between initial detection and submarine destruction. Conventional depth charge attacks typically required multiple runs, spanning 30 minutes to several hours, assuming the submarine could not escape entirely. Hedgehog attacks often achieved quicker kills when hits were scored, but required multiple attacks to achieve sufficient hit probability. Squid attacks averaged less than 5 minutes from first firing to confirmed kill, when the submarine was destroyed, or 15 to 20 minutes, when multiple attacks were needed to exhaust a submarine's evasive capability before the killing pattern landed. This efficiency mattered enormously in the operational environment of late 1944. Escorts protecting convoys could not afford to spend hours prosecuting individual submarine contacts while leaving other approaches to the convoy unguarded. Quick kills meant escorts could return to screening positions rapidly, maintaining the defensive perimeter that kept wolf-pack tactics from overwhelming convoy defenses. Hunter-killer groups, freed from prolonged pursuit of individual contacts, could maintain aggressive patrol patterns that interdicted U-boats before they reached attack positions. For U-boat crews, this efficiency translated into a terrifying reality. Once detected by a Squid-equipped escort, Survival required either extraordinary luck or immediate surfacing to surrender. Fighting from submerged positions, which had been viable against conventional escorts, became a death sentence. The few boats that escaped squid attacks did so primarily because attacking escorts exhausted their ammunition loads before achieving kills, forcing them to break contact while the submarine limped away damaged. October 1944 brought another dimension to the squid story, when HMS Loch Inch, operating off the Norwegian coast, engaged and sank U-992 inches circumstances that demonstrated the weapon's effectiveness even in challenging operational conditions. The Norwegian coast, with its fjords, rocky shoals, and complex acoustic environment, had historically provided U-boats with defensive advantages. The rocky seabed created sonar clutter, temperature layers from Arctic currents meeting Gulf Stream water bent sound waves unpredictably. Narrow channels limited escort maneuverability. Yet even in this difficult environment, advanced sonar and squid achieved results. U-992, commanded by Oberleutnant zur See Hans Falke, had been attempting to transit south from Narvik to Bergen when detected by an Allied patrol. The ensuing hunt lasted 3 hours as the submarine attempted to use coastal geography to break contact. Each time, Falke thought he had escaped into acoustic shadow zones created by underwater rock formations, the British sonar reacquired him. The Type 147 system, designed specifically to handle complex acoustic environments, distinguished between submarine echoes and returns from seabed features through signal processing techniques that had not existed in earlier equipment. When Loch Inch finally achieved a clear firing solution, the squid attack was textbook perfect. 3 charges, triangular pattern, simultaneous detonation at 220 meters depth. The convergent pressure waves crushed U-992's hull amidships. 49 men died. 3 survivors, blown clear through a ruptured hatch, were recovered by Norwegian resistance members who witnessed the attack from shore positions. Their account, radioed to Allied intelligence, confirmed that even in coastal waters offering maximum defensive advantage, squid-equipped escorts maintained lethal effectiveness. The psychological impact on surviving U-boat commanders manifested in patrol reports filed throughout late 1944. The language shifted from confident accounts of tactical successes to defensive descriptions of evasion and survival. Commanders wrote of being hunted by escorts that seemed to possess supernatural detection capabilities. They described attacks of impossible precision. They acknowledged that modern Allied anti-submarine forces had achieved technological dominance that nullified traditional submarine tactics. Admiral Karl Dönitz, who had led the U-boat force since 1936 and now served as head of the German Navy while still maintaining direct oversight of submarine operations, read these reports with growing recognition that the campaign he had championed faced terminal decline. His daily war diary, portions of which survived and were entered into evidence at the Nuremberg trials, documented the mathematical certainty of defeat. In September 1944, he wrote that U-boat losses exceeded new construction for the first time since 1941. In October, he noted that experienced commanders were dying faster than training schools could produce competent replacements. In November, he acknowledged that technological inferiority had become so pronounced that no tactical innovation could compensate. The impact of squid, while significant, formed only part of a larger pattern of Allied technological superiority. Centimetric radar detected surfaced submarines from ranges where U-boats' own radar warning receivers remained silent. Acoustic homing torpedoes forced submarines to adopt time-consuming and battery-draining evasion patterns. Long-range patrol aircraft closed the mid-Atlantic air gap, eliminating the sanctuary where U-boats had previously operated beyond land-based aircraft range. Escort carriers provided air cover for convoys, creating overlapping search patterns that made surface operations suicidal. Within this constellation of Allied advantages, squid represented the culmination, a weapon that could kill submarines with near certainty, once detection occurred, eliminating the final hope that skillful evasion might permit escape. November and December 1944 saw Squid deployments reach their operational peak. 70 escorts carried the system, distributed across all major convoy routes and patrol areas. Training programs had produced hundreds of operators proficient in the weapon's employment. Maintenance procedures had been refined to ensure high availability rates. The mechanical computers linking sonar to weapons functioned reliably even in the harsh North Atlantic environment. Everything that Allied anti-submarine forces had learned through 4 years of brutal warfare had been incorporated into a weapons system and tactical doctrine that approached theoretical maximum effectiveness given available technology. German counter-efforts, by contrast, struggled with resource constraints and conceptual limitations that prevented meaningful response. The Type 21 Electroboat, designed to restore submarine technological parity through revolutionary underwater performance, remained in development hell throughout late 1944. Quality control problems plagued rushed production. Training accidents killed experienced crews testing the unfamiliar boats. Most critically, even when Type 21s reached operational status in early 1945, they remained vulnerable to sonar detection and squid attack. Enhanced underwater speed and improved battery endurance could not overcome the fundamental vulnerability. Once detected, submarines could be killed by weapons that fired while escorts maintained continuous sonar contact. Acoustic torpedoes designed to home on escort propeller noise provided U-boats with offensive capability against their hunters. But these weapons arrived too late and in insufficient numbers to shift the tactical balance. Improved radar warning receivers that could detect centimetric Allied radar frequencies gave submarines seconds of warning rather than minutes, inadequate time for effective evasion. Snorkel devices that allowed diesel operation while submerged reduced the need for surface running but created distinctive wake patterns that trained eyes could spot from aircraft. Every German innovation addressed yesterday's threats, while Allied forces deployed new capabilities that rendered the innovations obsolete before widespread deployment. By January 1945, as the war entered its final months, the effectiveness of Squid-equipped escorts had become so pronounced that German Naval Command fundamentally reconsidered U-boat employment. Dönitz, in conferences with naval staff, acknowledged that offensive operations against Atlantic convoys had become strategically futile. Submarines could no longer sink. Merchantmen faster than Allied shipyards replaced them. The exchange ratio, once heavily favouring Germany, had inverted catastrophically. In 1942, each U-boat had sunk on average 8 to 10 merchant ships before being destroyed. By 1945, the average had fallen below 1 ship sunk per boat lost. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Germany was losing the tonnage war while simultaneously losing the submarine war, achieving neither strategic objective that had justified the campaign. The final Squid kills of the war came in April and early May 1945, as Germany's military collapse accelerated and surviving U-boats received orders to cease operations and proceed to designated Allied ports for surrender. HMS Loch-Moor scored her final kill on April 9th, sinking Une 1,065 inches the North Sea. HMS Loch-Lendhu destroyed U-2359 on April 26 in Norwegian waters. HMS Redmill achieved what may have been the final Squid kill of the war on May 2nd, sinking U-2533 inches the Western Baltic as Soviet forces closed on German positions from the east. The weapon that had entered service in May 1943 as a prototype rushed into operational deployment had, by war's end, fundamentally altered the dynamics of anti-submarine warfare. Its impact extended beyond the 17 confirmed kills officially credited to the system. The mere presence of Squid-equipped escorts forced changes in U-boat tactics that reduced operational effectiveness even when the weapon was not directly employed. Submarines spent more time submerged, reducing battery life and limiting time available for attacks. Commanders avoided areas known to have Squid-equipped patrols, restricting operational freedom. Crews suffered increased psychological stress from knowledge that detection likely meant death, degrading performance, and decision-making. Most significantly, Squid demonstrated that integration of advanced sensors with automated weapons systems could achieve results impossible through human operators alone. The mechanical computers linking sonar to mortars operated with speed and precision, exceeding manual calculations. The ahead-throwing configuration allowed attack while maintaining sensor contact. The synchronized detonation patterns exploited hydrodynamic physics to create crush effects beyond simple explosive force. These principles, validated by wartime experience, would shape post-war anti-submarine weapon development for decades. But in spring 1945, as the war in Europe ground toward conclusion, the immediate significance was simple. Allied escorts had achieved technological dominance in underwater warfare that German forces could not counter within available timeframes. The submarine force that had nearly severed Britain's Atlantic lifeline in 1942 had been reduced to strategic irrelevance by combination of superior technology, overwhelming industrial production, and operational doctrine that exploited every Allied advantage. For the men who had served in U-boats and survived, the memory of Squid attacks joined acoustic torpedoes, centimetric radar, and pervasive air coverage in the catalogue of Allied technologies that had transformed them from confident hunters into desperate prey. The post-war accounting revealed the full scope of what Squid had accomplished. Of the 17 confirmed submarine kills, officially credited to the weapon system, 16 were German U-boats, and 1 was a Japanese submarine operating in European waters. These 17 kills came from 50 documented attacks, where results could be definitively confirmed, producing the 2.9-to-1 ratio that represented revolutionary effectiveness by anti-submarine warfare standards. But the raw numbers, while impressive, understated the weapon's broader impact on submarine operations and naval warfare doctrine. The true measure of Squid's effectiveness lay not just in boats destroyed, but in missions aborted, patrol areas abandoned, and tactical options eliminated from German consideration. By late 1944, U-boat commanders operated under standing orders that acknowledged Allied escort superiority. When detected by surface forces, boats were instructed to immediately dive to maximum safe depth and remain silent, attempting to evade rather than close for attacks. This defensive posture, mandated by recognition that fighting was futile, meant submarines accomplished nothing even when they survived encounters. The legacy of Squid extended far beyond its immediate wartime service. The weapon's principles, automated fire control linked to advanced sensors, a head-throwing capability that maintained contact during attack, and weapons powerful enough to kill through shock effect alone, became foundational doctrine for anti-submarine warfare that persists to this day. Post-war development of American ASROC missiles, Soviet anti-submarine rockets, and modern torpedo systems all traced their conceptual ancestry to lessons validated by Squid's operational success. The British Royal Navy continued using Squid until 1977, when HMS Salisbury fired the final operational rounds during training exercises, marking the end of an era in naval warfare. For the 30,000 German submariners who died during the war, including the crews of those 17 boats destroyed by Squid, their sacrifice demonstrated that courage and skill could not overcome fundamental technological disadvantage. They fought with extraordinary bravery against weapons that rendered traditional submarine tactics obsolete, dying in steel coffins crushed by pressure waves generated by a weapon most never understood and none could effectively counter. The memorials at Multenort near Kiel list their names without distinguishing how each man died, whether by Squid, conventional depth charges, or any other weapon. Death was death, regardless of the technology that delivered it. But for historians analyzing how the Battle of the Atlantic was won, Squid represented a culmination of scientific and engineering effort that transformed anti-submarine warfare from uncertain art to near-certain science. The weapon that sank U-333 on that July morning in 1944 embodied the principle that would dominate modern warfare: technological superiority, properly integrated and operationally employed, determines outcomes more decisively than individual courage or tactical skill. The 17 submarines destroyed by Squid were not the last targets killed by automated fire control systems. merely early examples of a trend that continues accelerating into the present day, where sensors, computers, and weapons combine to create lethality that exceeds human limitation. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. August 21st, 1942. Alligator Creek, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The darkness hung thick over the sandbar, broken only by occasional flashes of distant artillery. Private First Class Jack Rivers pressed his face against the warm steel of his .30 caliber Browning machine gun, listening to the sounds emerging from the jungle across the creek. Beside him, Private Al Schmid adjusted the belt feed mechanism, his hands moving with practiced precision developed through countless training drills stateside. They had been on this godforsaken island for exactly 2 weeks. In the coconut grove behind their position, the rest of the 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, waited in foxholes dug into coral sand that cut hands and never seemed to provide adequate protection. Rivers checked his watch. 2:30 in the morning, 4 more hours until dawn. Then he heard it. Not the sound of the jungle. Something else. Movement. Splashing. Voices speaking Japanese. Growing louder, more confident. Closer. What happened in the next 17 hours would shatter Japanese confidence in their tactical superiority and validate a technological gamble the United States Army had made 6 years earlier. The Japanese Imperial Army's 28th Infantry Regiment, veterans of victories across China and the Pacific, was about to encounter something they had not anticipated. Not American courage, though they would find that in abundance. Not American determination, though the Marines would demonstrate plenty. No. Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki's elite troops were about to collide with American industrial firepower in its most lethal infantry manifestation. The M1 Garand semi-automatic rifle. The mathematics of this engagement would tell a story about firepower, tactical doctrine, and the collision between 19th century infantry tactics and 20th century weapons technology. One side believed in the superiority of spirit and the shock value of mass assault. The other possessed a technological advantage so decisive that it would transform Pacific war tactics for every battle that followed. Before dawn on August 21st, Japanese confidence stood at its zenith. After sunrise, that confidence would lie shattered on a sandbar, along with hundreds of bodies. The story begins not with confrontation, but with parallel paths of doctrinal development that would converge catastrophically on Guadalcanal's beaches. In Tokyo during the 1930s, Imperial Japanese Army doctrine emphasized 3 fundamental principles: rifle marksmanship at extended range, bayonet charges at close quarters, and machine gun support for both. This trinity of infantry tactics had served Japan well in Manchuria, China, and the early Pacific campaigns. Japanese military thinkers, steeped in centuries of martial tradition, believed that superior fighting spirit, or seishin, could overcome material disadvantages. The Imperial Army's standard infantry rifle, the Type 38 Arisaka, reflected this philosophy perfectly. Adopted in 1905 and named for the 38th year of Emperor Meiji's reign, this bolt-action rifle fired a 6.5mm round. The rifle measured 50 inches in total length with bayonet attached, longer than most Japanese soldiers were tall. This extraordinary length was intentional. Japanese doctrine emphasized bayonet combat as the ultimate expression of martial prowess and warrior spirit. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Type 38 was well made, reliable, and accurate. Japanese soldiers trained extensively in its use, achieving remarkable proficiency in aimed fire. But it possessed one critical limitation that Japanese military planners considered acceptable, even desirable. It was a bolt-action rifle. After each shot, the soldier had to work the bolt mechanism, lift, pull back, push forward, lock down, chamber the next round. This cycle took approximately 2 seconds for a trained soldier under ideal conditions. In combat, under stress, wet with rain or blood, that time stretched longer. A skilled Japanese rifleman could fire perhaps 15 to 20 aimed shots per minute. Japanese military doctrine accepted this limitation because it emphasized fire discipline and ammunition conservation. Soldiers were trained to make every shot count, to aim carefully, to demonstrate the superior marksmanship that marked the imperial warrior. This philosophy had worked adequately when fighting Chinese forces armed with similar bolt-action rifles, or British and Dutch colonial troops in Malaya and the East Indies. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, American military thinking had followed a completely different evolutionary path. In January 1936, after years of development, testing, and bureaucratic resistance, the United States Army officially adopted the M1 Garand as its standard service rifle. This decision represented the most radical transformation of infantry firepower in military history. For the first time, a major military power would equip its entire frontline infantry with semi-automatic rifles. The path to this adoption had been neither smooth nor certain. John Cantius Garand, a Canadian-born engineer working at Springfield Armory in Massachusetts since 1919, had spent 17 years developing his gas-operated rifle design. His early prototypes failed testing. Ammunition changes forced complete redesigns. Army traditionalists questioned whether soldiers even needed semi-automatic fire. Budget constraints during the Depression nearly killed the entire program. Garand persisted through sheer stubbornness and engineering brilliance. His final design used a gas-operated rotating bolt system of elegant simplicity. When fired, expanding gases were tapped from the barrel through a port located near the muzzle. These gases drove a piston that operated a long operating rod running beneath the barrel. The rod drove the bolt, which rotated to unlock, extracted and ejected the spent cartridge case, loaded a fresh round from the unblock clip, and locked closed again. The entire cycle occurred in fractions of a second. The soldier never touched anything except the trigger. Pull, bang, pull, bang, pull, bang. As fast as the trigger finger could move, the rifle fired. 8 rounds in the internal magazine, loaded via a spring steel N-block clip that held the cartridges together. When the 8th round fired, the clip ejected automatically with a distinctive metallic ping, the bolt locked open, and the rifle was ready for immediate reloading. Insert new clip, release bolt. 8 more rounds ready to fire. The reload took approximately 3 seconds for a trained soldier. The M1 Garand fired the powerful .30-06 Springfield cartridge. This .30 caliber round, standardized in 1906, hence its designation, fired a 150-grain bullet at approximately 2,800 feet per second, generating over 2,600 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. This gave the round tremendous range, penetration, and stopping power. A soldier hit center mass with a .30-06 round went down and stayed down. The kinetic energy transfer was devastating. The rifle itself weighed 9.5 pounds unloaded, 11.2 pounds with a loaded clip, bayonet, and sling. Its 43.6-inch length and 24-inch barrel provided excellent accuracy. The adjustable rear aperture sight allowed precise fire at varying ranges. In trained hands, the M1 could engage targets effectively beyond 500 yards, though most Pacific combat occurred at much shorter ranges. When General George Smith Patton famously called it the greatest battle implement ever devised in a letter dated January 26, 1945, he was not engaging in hyperbole. He was describing the weapon that had given American infantry decisive firepower superiority across every theater of war. But in August 1942, this superiority remained largely theoretical. The M1 Garand was still being introduced to frontline units. Many Marines landing on Guadalcanal on August 7th still carried M1903 Springfield bolt-action rifles. The Marine Corps had deliberately chosen a phased implementation policy, evaluating the Garand's performance in harsh amphibious conditions before committing fully to the new weapon. Production had ramped up slowly. Springfield Armory and Winchester Repeating Arms Company were still perfecting mass production techniques. Not every Marine had received the new rifle, but those who had developed fierce loyalty to it within days of first using it in combat, they discovered something that would prove decisive in the coming battles. When they pulled the trigger, the rifle fired. When they aimed at an enemy, if they did their part, the weapon did its part. When they needed rapid follow-up shots, the semi-automatic action delivered them without any manual operation required. They could keep their sight picture, maintain their firing position, and deliver 8 rounds in the time it took a Japanese soldier to fire 2 or 3 shots with his bolt-action Arisaka. The tactical implications were profound, though not yet fully understood by either side. An 8-man Marine rifle squad armed with M1 Garands could put out more firepower than a full Japanese platoon armed with bolt-action rifles. This firepower advantage would multiply dramatically when American forces also employed Browning automatic rifles, Thompson submachine guns, and Browning machine guns as supporting weapons. But the Japanese did not know this yet. Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki certainly did not know it on August 19th, when his 916 elite soldiers came ashore at Taivu Point, 22 miles east of the American positions at Henderson Field. The Ichiki detachment, officially designated the first element of the 28th Infantry Regiment, represented some of the finest troops in the Imperial Japanese Army. They had fought in China, they had trained extensively for tropical warfare, they possessed absolute confidence in their superiority over any enemy. Ichiki himself embodied the aggressive spirit of the Imperial Army. He had been the officer whose actions at the Marco Polo Bridge near Beijing in July 1937 touched off renewed fighting between China and Japan, leading directly to the rape of Nanking. He was a product of Japanese military academies, steeped in Bushido tradition, contemptuous of Western armies, and absolutely certain of victory. His orders were straightforward: scout the American positions, wait for the remainder of his regiment to arrive, then attack and retake Henderson Field. Ichiki had no intention of waiting. His journal entries, recovered after the battle, reveal his mindset. 18th August, landing. 20th August, march by night and battle. 21st August, enjoyment of the fruit of victory. He expected the operation to take 3 days. He planned to celebrate victory before the rest of his regiment even arrived. This was not mere arrogance, though arrogance played its part. This was the product of systematic intelligence failure and doctrinal blindness. Japanese intelligence estimated American strength on Guadalcanal at perhaps 2,000 men, mostly construction troops with minimal combat capability. The actual American strength was 11,000 Marines, combat veterans who had trained extensively for amphibious operations. Japanese doctrine assumed that American soldiers lacked fighting spirit, that they were soft, that they would break and run when faced with determined Japanese assault. This belief had been reinforced by easy Japanese victories in the Philippines, Malaya, and the East Indies. What Ichiki did not know, what Japanese intelligence had failed to discover, was that the Americans possessed not just numerical superiority, but overwhelming technological advantages in individual infantry weapons. More critically, American forces had broken Japanese naval codes. Station Hypo, an intelligence unit in Hawaii, had intercepted and decoded messages linking Ichiki's unit with Destroyer Squadron 2. General Alexander Vandergrift, commanding the 1st Marine Division on Guadalcanal, knew an attack was coming. He knew approximately when. He knew approximately from which direction. The Marines prepared defensive positions accordingly. Along the east side of the Lunga perimeter, where Henderson Field's runways were taking shape, Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Pollock's 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines dug in along Alligator Creek. The position was naturally strong. The creek provided an obstacle, though crossable at certain points, particularly a sandbar near the mouth where the creek met the sea. Marines positioned machine guns with interlocking fields of fire covering these crossing points. Riflemen occupied foxholes behind the machine guns. Artillery registered on likely approach routes. The position was as ready as 2 weeks of frantic preparation could make it. On the night of August 20th, Marines along the perimeter reported increased enemy activity. Patrols made contact with Japanese reconnaissance elements. The attack was imminent. Just after midnight on August 21st, the Japanese began their approach. 900 soldiers moved through the darkness toward the American positions. They carried their Arisaka rifles with bayonets fixed. They carried grenades. They carried the absolute conviction that their attack would succeed. They had been told that Americans were cowards who would flee from a determined assault. They had been told that American equipment was inferior. They had been told that Japanese spirit would overcome any material disadvantage. They were about to discover how catastrophically wrong these assumptions were. At approximately 2:30 in the morning, Marine listening posts detected movement across Alligator Creek. The word passed back along the line. Condition red. Enemy approaching. Marines checked their weapons. Machine gunners in shored belts were properly fed. Riflemen with M1 Garands verified they had full clips loaded and additional clips readily accessible in their ammunition belts. Artillery crews stood ready to fire illumination rounds on command. Then came the first sounds of attack, shouting in Japanese, the splash of men crossing water, the distinctive report of Arisaka rifles firing, and immediately the American response. Machine guns opened fire. The Browning .30 caliber guns, firing at over 500 rounds per minute, cut through the darkness. Tracers carved red lines through the night. The heavier .50 caliber machine guns added their deeper thunder. Rounds burst overhead, turning night into flickering daylight. And then the riflemen opened fire. Marines with M1 Garands began delivering precise, rapid semi-automatic fire into the mass of Japanese soldiers attempting to cross the creek. The sound was distinctive, not the slower, more measured fire of bolt-action rifles, not the continuous roar of automatic weapons, but rapid, rhythmic, devastating semi-automatic fire. Bang, 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 bang. A slight pause while hands inserted fresh clips, then bang, 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 bang again. One Marine could deliver 8 aimed shots in approximately 10 seconds. Reload in 3 seconds. 8 more rounds in another 10 seconds. A single 8-man rifle squad could maintain almost continuous fire, with individual Marines reloading in rotation so that at any given moment, multiple rifles were firing. The Japanese soldiers crossing the sandbar encountered a wall of fire unlike anything they had experienced. Chinese armies with bolt-action rifles and limited ammunition could be overrun through sheer determination and accepting casualties. British and Dutch colonial forces, under-equipped and under-trained, had broken under the weight of Japanese attacks. But these Americans did not break, and their firepower did not slacken. Private Al Schmid, behind his machine gun, thought the figures on the sandbar looked like a bunch of cows coming down to drink. His gunner, Private Jack Rivers, tilted their .30 caliber water-cooled Browning down and left, raking targets at 125 rounds per minute. 30 yards to the right, Private First Class James Bull Warren provided crossfire with another .30 caliber. Behind them, Private First Class Elmer Slim, Fairchild's .50 caliber machine gun, added its devastating fire. And between and around these machine guns, Marines with M1 Garands delivered rapid, aimed fire that cut down Japanese soldiers as they attempted to cross. The first Japanese assault wave died on the sandbar. Bodies piled up in the shallow water. The creek ran red even in the darkness. Some Japanese soldiers reached the far bank and attempted to establish positions, but Marine riflemen engaged them immediately. In the close-range fighting, the M1's semi-automatic capability proved decisive. When a Japanese soldier emerged from cover to fire or throw a grenade, Marines could immediately deliver multiple rapid shots without losing their firing position. Japanese soldiers, armed with bolt-action rifles, had to work their bolts between shots, breaking their aim, losing precious seconds. Against semi-automatic fire, those seconds proved fatal. Colonel Ichiki regrouped his forces and ordered a second assault. This time, 150 to 200 soldiers charged across the sandbar. The result was identical. American firepower, particularly the concentrated fire of dozens of M1 Garands, shredded the assault formation. Bodies fell on top of bodies. The few Japanese soldiers who reached the American side of the creek were killed in hand-to-hand fighting or by immediate rifle fire from multiple directions. An officer advised Ichiki to withdraw. The colonel refused. He would not accept that American firepower could defeat Japanese spirit. He would not acknowledge that his elite troops were being massacred by what Japanese propaganda had dismissed as soft, inferior Western soldiers. Instead, he ordered a third attack, this time a flanking movement to the right, along the beach and into the surf. If his men could not cross the sandbar under direct fire, they would wade through chest-deep water around the American left flank. The Marines, well positioned with interlocking fields of fire, simply adjusted their aim. Machine guns swept the water. Riflemen poured semi-automatic fire into the Japanese soldiers struggling through the surf. Artillery dropped high-explosive rounds into the water, creating geysers that hurled bodies into the air. The attack failed. By dawn, Colonel Ichiki's elite detachment had lost perhaps half its strength and gained absolutely nothing. No breakthrough, no penetration of American lines, nothing but corpses floating in Alligator Creek and piled on the sandbar. As daylight revealed the extent of the carnage, General Vandergrift ordered a counterattack. A Marine battalion crossed Alligator Creek upstream, moved through the jungle, and attacked the Japanese from the rear, cutting off any retreat. The Japanese position, already untenable, became a death trap. Compressed into an ever-shrinking perimeter around a coconut grove with the sea at their backs, Ichiki's soldiers continued fighting. Aircraft from Henderson Field strafed their positions. Artillery pounded them, and the Marines closed in from three sides. Then came the final, devastating blow. 5M3. Stuart light tanks crossed the sandbar and advanced directly into the Japanese positions. The tanks' 37mm cannons and 30-caliber coaxial machine guns massacred the remaining defenders at point-blank range. War correspondent Richard Tregaskis witnessed the slaughter. It was fascinating to see them bustling amongst the trees, pivoting, turning, spitting sheets of yellow flame. It was like a comedy of toys, something unbelievable. To see them knocking over palm trees, which fell slowly, flushing the running figures of men from underneath their treads, following and firing at the fugitives. By early afternoon on August 21st, the Battle of the Tenaru, as it would be called, was effectively over. Of the 916 Japanese soldiers who had landed at Taivu Point 2 days earlier, approximately 800 were dead. 15 were captured, most of them unconscious from wounds. Perhaps 30 escaped back through the jungle to Taivu Point. The Marines suffered 34 dead and 75 wounded. The kill ratio exceeded 20-1 in favor of the Americans. Colonel Ichiki either died in the final fighting or committed ritual suicide immediately afterward. Accounts vary. His body was never positively identified among the hundreds of corpses. What was identified, what could not be denied or explained away, was the magnitude of the Japanese defeat, not a tactical setback, not a temporary repulse, but a comprehensive massacre of elite troops who had confidently expected easy victory. When news reached Rabaul, Japanese headquarters initially refused to believe it. A radio message stated, "The first echelon of the Ichiki detachment was almost annihilated this morning at a point near the airfield." Lieutenant Colonel Hiroshi Matsumoto, the operations officer who had met with Ichiki before the attack, insisted it must be a false report. General Harukichi Hyakutake tried to save face, radioing Tokyo. The attack of the Ichiki detachment was not entirely successful. 800 elite soldiers dead. The regiment's first element, effectively destroyed. And nothing gained. Not entirely successful was perhaps the most grotesque understatement of the Pacific War. The Japanese military establishment struggled to comprehend what had happened. How could elite imperial troops, veterans of victories across Asia, battle-hardened and supremely confident, be so completely destroyed by Americans whom propaganda had dismissed as soft and weak? The answer lay in firepower, specifically in the M1 Garand rifle and the tactical philosophy it enabled. A single Marine with an M1 Garand, properly trained and supplied with ammunition, possessed more practical combat firepower than 3 Japanese soldiers with bolt-action rifles. An 8-man Marine squad could deliver sustained fire equivalent to a full Japanese platoon. When combined with Browning automatic rifles, machine guns, mortars, and artillery, American firepower was simply overwhelming. Japanese tactical doctrine had no answer for this disparity. Their infantry tactics had been developed for a different era, when all armies used bolt-action rifles and firepower equality was assumed. Japanese advantages in training, discipline, and fighting spirit had always been decisive when matched against similarly armed Chinese forces or poorly equipped colonial troops. But those advantages meant nothing when the enemy could put out 3 times the volume of fire. The Battle of the Tenaru taught both sides critical lessons. For the Marines, it proved that they could defeat Japanese troops in stand-up fighting. The mystique of Japanese invincibility, built on 6 months of unbroken victories, shattered on Guadalcanal's beaches. "They ain't supermen," a Marine corporal explained afterward. "They're just tricky bastards." For the Japanese, the lesson should have been even clearer. Frontal assaults against prepared American positions would result in catastrophic casualties. American firepower superiority, particularly the semi-automatic rifles carried by every infantryman, negated Japanese advantages in close combat. But institutional inertia and cultural factors prevented the Japanese from fully learning this lesson. Senior officers attributed the defeat to Ichiki's recklessness and tactical errors rather than fundamental problems with Japanese doctrine. They ordered additional forces to Guadalcanal, larger forces, but with the same basic tactical approach: attack aggressively, close with the enemy, use superior spirit to overcome material disadvantage. This formula would fail again and again across the Pacific. What the Japanese did not fully grasp, what their military culture made difficult to acknowledge, was that the nature of infantry combat had fundamentally changed. The M1 Garand represented not merely an incremental improvement in firepower, but a revolutionary transformation in what an individual infantryman could accomplish. A soldier with a semi-automatic rifle firing full-power cartridges could dominate tactical engagements in ways impossible with bolt-action weapons. Consider the mathematics more carefully. A Japanese soldier with a Type 38 Arisaka could fire perhaps 15 aimed shots per minute under good conditions. He carried 60 rounds in ammunition pouches. At maximum practical rate of fire, he would expend his ammunition in 4 minutes. A Marine with an M1 Garand could fire 40 to 50 aimed shots per minute. He typically carried 80 rounds in 10 8-round clips. At maximum practical rate of fire, he would expend his ammunition in under 2 minutes. But this comparison understates the American advantage because it ignores critical factors. The Marine maintained his sight picture between shots. He never broke his firing position. He could engage targets as soon as he acquired them without the delay of working a bolt mechanism. Perhaps most importantly, he could reload in approximately 3 seconds by inserting a fresh en-bloc clip versus the 15 to 20 seconds required to reload a bolt-action rifle with stripper clips. The psychological effect multiplied the technical advantage. Japanese soldiers found themselves under continuous fire from enemies who seemed to never need to reload, who could deliver devastating volumes of accurate fire, who could not be rushed successfully because they could immediately respond with multiple rapid shots. The doctrine of Seishin, of superior fighting spirit overcoming material disadvantage, offered no counter to this firepower disparity. How does fighting spirit stop a .30 caliber bullet traveling at 2,800 feet per second? How does determination overcome the simple mathematical fact that the enemy can fire 3 times as many shots in a given period? Japanese soldiers were not cowards. They were not poorly trained. They were not lacking in courage or dedication. They were simply outgunned by a weapon that represented the future of infantry warfare, while they carried rifles from the past. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. In the weeks following the Battle of the Tenaru, Both sides began adjusting their tactics based on hard lessons learned. American commanders recognized that their firepower advantage was decisive and began developing tactics to maximize it. Japanese commanders, after initial denial, began to understand that they faced a significant problem. But cultural and institutional factors limited their ability to respond effectively. The story of how this firepower revolution transformed Pacific War combat and how both sides adapted or failed to adapt would play out across dozens of island battlefields over the next 3 years. The adaptation occurred asymmetrically. American forces, confident in their weapons and increasingly skilled in their use, became more aggressive. Japanese forces, unable to match American firepower directly, increasingly turned to defensive tactics, night attacks, and infiltration methods designed to minimize exposure to devastating American rifle fire. The next major Japanese offensive on Guadalcanal came 3 weeks after the Tenaru disaster. The Battle of Edson's Ridge, fought from September 12th through 14th, 1942, saw the Japanese employ significantly larger forces. Approximately 3,000 soldiers from Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi's 35th Brigade attacked Marine positions along a coral ridge south of Henderson Field. This time, Japanese tactics showed some evolution. Instead of a straightforward frontal assault, Kawaguchi attempted infiltration through dense jungle, night attacks to negate American firepower advantages, and multiple simultaneous assaults to overwhelm defensive positions. The attacks came close to success. On the night of September 13th, Japanese forces penetrated Marine lines at several points. Desperate hand-to-hand fighting erupted across the ridge. But even in these close-quarters engagements, the M1 Garand proved its worth. Marines could fire rapidly without working bolt mechanisms. They could engage multiple targets in quick succession. When Japanese soldiers emerged from the darkness, Marines with semi-automatic rifles could immediately deliver multiple shots. The sustained firefight lasted through the night. Japanese forces attacked repeatedly, accepting horrific casualties in their attempts to break through. Marine positions held, largely because individual riflemen with M1 Garands could maintain rates of fire that stopped assault after assault. When dawn broke on September 14th, the ridge was carpeted with Japanese dead. Kawaguchi's brigade had suffered approximately 800 killed and over 1,000 wounded. The Marines lost approximately 100 killed and 200 wounded. Again, the kill ratio favored American forces by a substantial margin. Again, Japanese tactical doctrine had proven inadequate against American firepower. Colonel Merritt Edson, who commanded the Marine Defenders and would later receive the Medal of Honor for his actions, specifically credited the M1 Garand in his after-action reports. He noted that the rifle's rapid semi-automatic fire had been decisive in breaking up Japanese assault formations before they could close to effective bayonet range. Individual Marines, properly armed and trained, had held positions that would have been overrun if they had been armed with bolt-action rifles. The pattern repeated across subsequent Guadalcanal battles. In October, during the Battle of Henderson Field, Japanese forces launched their largest offensive yet. Over 20,000 troops, supported by artillery and tanks, attacked the Marine perimeter from multiple directions. The 3-day battle saw some of the most intense fighting of the Guadalcanal campaign. Japanese forces achieved several penetrations of American lines. Close-quarters combat raged through jungle and along ridge lines. Yet even with numerical superiority and better tactical planning, Japanese forces could not overcome American firepower advantages. Marines with M1 Garands, supported by Browning automatic rifles and machine guns, maintained defensive positions through sustained, accurate fire. When Japanese forces attempted banzai charges, thinking to overwhelm defenders through sheer numbers and fighting spirit, they encountered walls of semi-automatic fire that cut them down before they could close. Sergeant John Basilone, manning a heavy machine gun position during this battle, would receive the Medal of Honor for his actions. But Basilone himself later credited the Marines around him armed with M1 Garands for protecting his position. When Japanese forces attempted to flank his machine gun nest, Riflemen with semi-automatic weapons delivered the volume of fire necessary to stop the attacks. The individual superiority of the M1 Garand, multiplied across hundreds of Marines, created cumulative tactical advantages that proved decisive. By December 1942, when the 1st Marine Division finally departed Guadalcanal for rest and refitting in Australia, they left behind over 25,000 Japanese dead. American casualties, while significant, were substantially lower. The firepower disparity represented by the M1 Garand had played a crucial role in this lopsided casualty ratio. More importantly, the psychological effect on both sides was profound. Americans knew they possessed superior weapons and increasingly believed in their ability to defeat Japanese forces. Japanese soldiers increasingly understood they were outgunned. Captured Japanese documents from late 1942 and early 1943 reveal growing concern about American semi-automatic rifles. Intelligence reports described the M1 Garand in detail, noting its 8-round capacity, rapid rate of fire, and powerful cartridge. Tactical guidance increasingly emphasized avoiding direct firefights with American forces at medium ranges, where the Garand's advantages were most pronounced. A translated Japanese training manual from 1944 warned that American semi-automatic rifles could deliver devastating firepower and advised that Japanese forces should avoid rifle duels at extended ranges. The document recommended night attacks and close combat as the only viable tactics against American rifle-equipped units. This represented a tacit admission that Japanese infantry, armed with bolt-action rifles, could not compete effectively in conventional firefights. The evolution of Japanese tactics across the Pacific War reflected this growing understanding. At Tarawa in November 1943, Japanese defenders largely abandoned banzai charges in favor of fortified defensive positions. They built elaborate bunkers and pillboxes, forcing Marines to advance under fire rather than allowing Americans to establish defensive positions and wait for Japanese attacks. This tactical shift recognized that attacking prepared American positions resulted in catastrophic casualties due to superior American firepower. Yet even in defense, Japanese forces found the M1 Garand a formidable adversary. Marines advancing across Tarawa's beaches and through its defensive positions used their semi-automatic rifles to suppress Japanese firing positions while other units maneuvered. The ability to deliver rapid-aimed fire while advancing, what General Patton called marching fire, allowed American forces to maintain momentum in attacks that would have stalled if soldiers needed to stop and work bolt mechanisms between shots. At Saipan, in June and July 1944, the dual nature of the M1's advantages became fully apparent. In the initial fighting, Japanese defenders employed sophisticated defensive tactics, making Marines pay heavily for every yard of ground. But Japanese commanders, facing inevitable defeat, eventually reverted to traditional tactics. On July 7th, General Yoshitsugu Saito ordered a massive banzai charge, gathering approximately 4,300 soldiers, walking wounded, and civilians for a final assault. The charge slammed into positions held by the Army's 105th Infantry Regiment. The fighting lasted 15 hours. American casualties approached 1,000 men killed and wounded, but Japanese losses were catastrophic. Nearly every soldier participating in the charge died. The sustained fire from M1 Garands, Browning automatic rifles, and machine guns created an impassable barrier of lead. Japanese soldiers fell by the hundreds, their bodies piling up in front of American positions. Individual accounts from Saipan illustrate the M1's effectiveness in the most visceral terms. Private First Class Harold Keller of the 105th Infantry described firing his M1 Garand continuously for over an hour during the banzai charge, expending over 200 rounds. He reloaded dozens of times, the distinctive ping of ejecting clips lost in the overwhelming noise of battle. His rifle never malfunctioned despite continuous rapid fire in humid tropical conditions. When the battle ended, his position was surrounded by dead Japanese soldiers, many of whom had fallen within 20 yards of his foxhole. The Saipan Banzai Charge represented the largest such attack of the Pacific War. It also demonstrated the futility of such tactics against modern American firepower. General Saito himself committed suicide before the charge, understanding that the attack was less a military operation than a final gesture of defiance. The mathematics were inescapable. No amount of courage or determination could overcome the simple fact that American soldiers could fire 3 times as many rounds as Japanese soldiers in any given period. At Peleliu in September through November 1944, Japanese defenders under Colonel Kunio Nakagawa employed the most sophisticated defensive tactics yet seen. Nakagawa explicitly forbade Banzai charges, recognizing them as wasteful and ineffective. Instead, Japanese forces fought from elaborate cave systems, emerging only to engage exposed American units before retreating underground. This forced Marines to advance into killing zones where Japanese advantages in terrain and preparation offset some American firepower superiority. Yet even in these circumstances, the M1 Garand provided crucial advantages. Marines could place accurate suppressive fire on cave openings while other units maneuvered. The 30-06 rounds penetration could defeat improvised fortifications and armor that lighter cartridges could not. When Japanese defenders emerged to counterattack, Marines could immediately respond with rapid semi-automatic fire without losing precious seconds working bolt mechanisms. Private First Class Richard Krause posthumously received the Medal of Honor for actions on Peleliu that exemplified individual firepower enabled by the M1 Garand. When his squad was pinned down by Japanese fire, Krause advanced alone against enemy positions, using his Garand to eliminate multiple enemy strongpoints. He fired rapidly while moving, maintaining suppressive fire that kept Japanese defenders from effectively engaging him until he could close with grenades. His ability to deliver rapid, accurate fire while maneuvering would have been impossible with a bolt-action rifle. The Philippines campaign of late 1944 and early 1945 saw the M1 Garand employed in every type of terrain and tactical situation, from jungle fighting on Leyte to urban combat in Manila, from mountain warfare on Luzon to amphibious assaults on smaller islands. American forces consistently demonstrated firepower superiority enabled by semi-automatic rifles. Japanese forces, increasingly short of ammunition and supplies due to effective submarine blockade, found themselves doubly disadvantaged. Not only were they outgunned, but they lacked the industrial capacity to sustain prolonged firefights. At Iwo Jima in February and March 1945, the M1 Garand faced perhaps its sternest test. The volcanic ash and black sand of Iwo created unique challenges for weapons maintenance. Fine particles infiltrated every mechanical device, yet the Garand's robust design proved equal to the challenge. Marines could clear their rifles quickly, using simple field maintenance procedures, and return to action. The gas-operated system, while requiring more maintenance than a bolt-action rifle, proved remarkably tolerant of fouling when properly maintained. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commanding Japanese defenses on Iwo Jima, had studied American tactics extensively. He understood that Banzai charges were futile against American firepower. His defensive plan emphasized prepared positions, interlocking fields of fire, and fighting from caves and tunnels. He explicitly ordered his troops to avoid wasteful attacks and instead inflict maximum casualties through disciplined defensive fighting. This represented the ultimate evolution of Japanese tactics in response to American firepower superiority. Yet even Kuribayashi's sophisticated defense could not offset the advantages American forces possessed. Individual Marines with M1 Garands could engage Japanese positions at ranges where defenders armed with bolt-action rifles struggled to respond effectively. The sustained firefights that characterized Iwo Jima fighting favored American forces who could maintain higher rates of fire while conserving ammunition through accurate shooting. The battle lasted 36 days and cost nearly 7,000 American lives, but over 21,000 Japanese defenders died. The casualty ratio, while not as lopsided as earlier battles, still favored American forces substantially. The final major Pacific battle at Okinawa from April through June 1945 saw the M1 Garand at peak effectiveness. American forces, now fully equipped with semi-automatic rifles and with years of combat experience, employed tactics specifically designed to maximize their firepower advantages. Japanese defenders, under Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, fought with skill and determination from elaborate defensive positions, but they could not overcome the fundamental disparity in individual soldier firepower. The 10th Army, comprising both Marine and Army divisions, brought overwhelming firepower to bear on Japanese positions. Individual riflemen with M1 Garands could engage Japanese forces at ranges exceeding 400 yards in the open terrain of southern Okinawa. In the close combat of the Shuri Line, the stopping power of the .30-06 cartridge proved essential for defeating determined Japanese defenders in fortified positions. The battle consumed over 12,000 American lives and over 100,000 Japanese soldiers and Okinawan civilians. But the outcome was never in doubt once American forces established themselves ashore. Throughout these campaigns, ammunition expenditure statistics tell their own story about firepower disparity. At Okinawa, Marine and Army units fired over 200 million rounds of .30-06 ammunition during the 82-day campaign. This represented more ammunition than the entire Japanese military-industrial complex had produced for all small arms calibers during several years of the war. Individual Marines carried and expended more ammunition in single days of fighting than Japanese soldiers received for entire operations. This profligate expenditure was possible only because of American industrial supremacy. Springfield Armory and Winchester produced M1 Garands by the millions. American factories churned out billions of rounds of .30-06 ammunition. Supply lines, despite vast Pacific distances, ensured continuous ammunition availability. Marines never worried about running out of .30-06 ammunition. They never questioned whether a round would fire or function properly. They knew that if they pulled the trigger, the rifle would fire, and that unlimited resupply was available. Japanese forces, conversely, increasingly suffered from ammunition shortages as the war progressed. American submarines strangled Japanese supply lines. Strategic bombing destroyed Japanese factories. By 1945, Japanese soldiers often fought with minimal ammunition reserves, sometimes fewer than 50 rounds per soldier. Even if they had possessed semi-automatic rifles, they lacked the ammunition to sustain the higher rates of fire such weapons enabled. American industrial capacity had created not just a technological advantage but a logistical one that proved equally decisive. The human cost of Japan's doctrinal and technological disadvantage was staggering. Conservative estimates suggest that the firepower disadvantage cost Japanese forces at least 150,000 additional casualties in ground combat. These were soldiers who might have survived with weapons equal to those carried by American forces. The disparity was not merely technical but reflected fundamental differences in industrial philosophy and national capacity. American mass production, exemplified by the M1 Garand program, prioritized standardization, interchangeability, and rigorous quality control at massive scale. Every M1 Garand was completely interchangeable with every other Garand. Every part met strict specifications. Every weapon underwent testing. Defects were identified and corrected. The system emphasized consistent, reliable output measured in millions of units. Japanese production, more artisanal in tradition and increasingly disrupted by war, could not match either the quantity or consistency of American output. When the war ended in August 1945 with Japanese surrender, American occupation forces discovered remaining Japanese arsenals filled with bolt-action Arisaka rifles, largely unchanged from designs dating to the early 20th century. Small numbers of experimental semi-automatic rifles existed, including a few hundred copies of the M1 Garand that Japanese arsenals had attempted to reverse engineer. But these had never reached frontline troops in significant numbers and were plagued by reliability problems. The Japanese Self-Defense Forces, established in 1954 after occupation ended, notably chose not to retain any Japanese World War II small arms, except for ceremonial purposes. Instead, they initially adopted American M1 Garands, provided through military assistance programs. This represented an implicit acknowledgement by former Japanese military officers that the Garand had proven superior in every respect that mattered. They had learned through bitter experience what worked in modern warfare. The M1 Garand's legacy extended far beyond World War II. The rifle continued in American military service through the Korean War from 1950 through 53, where it again proved superior to bolt-action rifles and even to many submachine guns in varied combat conditions. At the Chosin Reservoir in November and December 1950, Marines armed with M1 Garands fought in temperatures reaching -35 degrees Fahrenheit. The rifles continued functioning when other weapons failed, their robust design and simple gas system proving equal to extreme cold. The rifle directly influenced development of the M14, essentially an M1 Garand modified to use a 20-round detachable box magazine and capable of selective fire. The M14 entered service in 1959 and saw extensive use in Vietnam. Even after replacement by the M16, M14s remained in service as designated marksman rifles, a role they continue to fill in modified form today. The core design principles of the Garand, prioritizing reliability, power, and effectiveness over other considerations, influenced American military small arms development for decades. Modern military historians and firearms experts examining the Pacific War consistently conclude that the M1 Garand provided American forces with a decisive tactical advantage. Combined with superior supporting arms, overwhelming industrial capacity, and increasingly skilled troops, the Garand helped ensure American victory in every major campaign. The rifle was not solely responsible for victory, obviously. Tactics, training, leadership, logistics, naval power, and air superiority all contributed crucially, but the individual superiority of American infantry firepower, exemplified by the M1 Garand, formed the foundation upon which other advantages built. The final accounting came not in statistics, but in the lived experience of soldiers who carried the rifle in combat. Veterans of Pacific fighting consistently praised the M1 Garand as the finest infantry rifle of its era. In hundreds of oral histories, memoirs, and interviews conducted over subsequent decades, former Marines and soldiers expressed unwavering confidence in the weapon that had kept them alive through desperate battles across a dozen islands. They remembered that it had always fired when they pulled the trigger. They remembered that it had given them firepower superiority over determined enemies. They remembered that it had allowed them to survive and ultimately prevail. The story that began on a dark sandbar at Alligator Creek in August 1942 ultimately encompassed the entire transformation of infantry warfare in the 20th century. Japanese forces, carrying weapons and tactics from an earlier era, had encountered American forces armed with the future. The M1 Garand represented not merely an incremental improvement, but a revolutionary leap in what individual soldiers could accomplish. That revolution, measured in rates of fire and ammunition capacity, translated directly into battlefield dominance. Colonel Ichiki's confident prediction of victory celebration within 3 days had proven tragically wrong. His elite troops had been massacred, his tactical doctrine had failed catastrophically, and the lesson would be repeated across dozens of Pacific battlefields, as Japanese forces repeatedly discovered that courage and determination could not overcome overwhelming firepower disadvantage. The distinctive ping of an ejecting M1 Garand clip, far from signaling vulnerability, had become the sound of American victory, repeated 8 rounds at a time across 3 years of Pacific War. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.